I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over. And Denne Michele Norris has been writing a novel for 14 years. It's finally here. It's called When the Harvest Comes. And it's a love story and a story about art and marriage and family and lots of other things that we're not going to talk about because we are spoiler-free on this show, as everyone knows. 14 years to write this gorgeous book.
Yeah.
How does it feel to be, well, technically done? You haven't started the promotion yet, but technically you are done with the writing, my friend.
I am done. It feels wild. It's incredibly surreal. This book basically took up my entire adult life. I was always thinking about it, even though I went through long periods where sometimes I wasn't getting much writing done. And that's because I was attending to the business of learning how to be an adult, learning how to be an adult in New York City, using the subway, learning how to pay a bill on time, learning how to set up utilities when I moved, building a career, making a living, finding jobs, building friendships, dating. I was doing all the things that one does to live a full life. And so there were periods where I was writing furiously, and there were periods where it, sort of sadly had to take a back seat. But I did it. And here we are. And it feels great.
I'm so pleased this book is out in the world. We are going to keep to a tighter cast. You have a very small cast in the book, but we are going to keep to sort of four main characters. We've got Davis and his husband, Everett, Davis's dad, the Reverend, and his sister, Olivia. And it's so that we can avoid giving anything away by accident. But I want to start with Davis because I love his voice. And I feel like I haven't really met anyone like Davis before. I mean, he's a dedicated musician, and you made him a viola player. So maybe we start with the instrument because it's kind of old-fashioned.
It is enormously old-fashioned, and it's an instrument that you don't see that much portrayed anywhere in sort of popular culture. And what's funny is that, I played the viola for many years. I started in the 4th grade. I went all the way through college, and for many years, I wanted to be a professional violist. So it was a big part of my life. And so when I was writing this book, I had no interest in making Davis a violist. I at first wanted him, I was like, absolutely not. Like, it's too random. And I didn't have a reason for it. And so for years, I thought he was going to be a cellist. I heard Elizabeth Strout say once many years ago, is there anything more mournful than a cello? And this was around the time that I was just starting this book. And I thought, okay. And I thought there isn't. And that's the vibe. So let's make him a cellist. And I love the cello. And then a few years later, I wanted Davis's career to be working differently. And so I was like, let's make him more successful. Let's make him a soloist and a star. Let's make him a violinist. And so when I completed the first draft of the book, he was a violinist. And then as I was doing revisions and I began to understand the full arc of the narrative, I realized that I had no choice but to make Davis a violist for things that are very specific to the instrument. So I don't want to go into too many details.
No. Let's not. But yeah. It was funny when I was reading, I was like, I don't think I've ever, it is hard to capture music well on the page. I will say that. Like, some novels do it exceptionally well, and some novels you're like, oh, this is a great idea, and it is not happening. The idea of being an orchestral concert musician, I was like, okay, so we're going to put one foot back and sort of, all respect to concert musicians, but, classical music doesn't quite have the swing culturally that it did in previous decades, right? Like, I mean, yes, there are great places to see amazing music. I mean, certainly if you live in a major market, but there are also secondary and tertiary markets where you can find really exceptional performances, but as like a monoculture kind of thing, it's not what it was.
No, not at all. Not at all. It was a unique choice, but I love classical music. And it just, I felt like it worked. I felt like it fit into the narrative. It fit into the character so well. And when I look at my life and I look at building a writing career, I was never going to write a book. I was never going to not write a book that dealt with classical music heavily. It just couldn't happen. So this is the one. I don't know that there will be any others, but I had so much fun with those pages and in writing those sections. It was a joy.
And I grew up with both of my parents keeping classical on in the background. Like, you would just sort of wander through the house. Other parents did, jazz or Neil Diamond. And I had, WGBH in the background at all times. And so I do kind of just associate it with being home. And I've seen some great performances, but I do sort of think of it as a very sort of intimate home experience, because I also grew up sort of in a place where other people's parents did that too. It was just very normal. It was
yes.
like, it was just a thing, and it's always sort of there in the back of your brain. When did Davis... I mean, you write character first, I think. That's sort of how I feel about it. And I feel like Davis showed up before Everett.
Yes.
And I love the messiness of their relationship. I mean, we meet them as they're getting married, and there's a lot of great stuff, and then there's a lot of like, this is kind of adorable, because you don't put marriage on a pedestal, which I appreciate.
No.
But let's talk about Davis. And Davis, shows up from Ohio. He comes to New York for his reasons. But he's a really kind of original voice.
It is amazing, Miwa, to hear you say that. It really is. Because that is how I approached Davis. That is how I wanted him to be received from jump. You're absolutely right. He showed up first. His situation showed up first. Everett showed up right after him, but Everett took a much longer time to get a handle on. But with Davis, I really wanted to capture a certain amount of tenderness towards Black boyhood that I don't think we see in literature enough. And I wanted to capture it with a character who was specifically queer, because I think we don't see that often enough. And I wanted to write a character who could be sort of tender and delicate and soft and, really think that he has moved past any idea that there's anything wrong with that. I think we're so inundated with those messages that that's not okay. And I wanted to write a character who thought he was past that, and then long buried things come up and he realizes maybe he's not quite as past everything as he thought he was. So that was really interesting. And I kept thinking a lot about Toni Morrison and what she said about how she approached writing The Bluest Eye, when she wanted to write about the character who's like the least taken seriously, the least cared for, the least protected in society. And I thought, this character is one of those characters, and I want to write a book that takes him and his experiences and his memories and his traumas and his joys seriously and centers them.
Yeah, and I think it's important for all of us to have that moment where a character has to interrogate his own understanding of his feelings. Like male, female, like plenty of us have discovered new language for talking about our experience in the world, right? Like, this is the beauty of language. It evolves, experience evolves. We find ways to unfortunately label, but like, let's use that for want of a better word at the moment. But you can, men seem to struggle with this more in some ways, because we're kind of like, well, walk it off. Like, we're all sort of guilty of teaching young boys to just sort of walk it off. Like, what are you crying about? Why do you have emotion? And then, of course, there might also be women who pick up those habits as well.
Maybe.
Let's not pretend that all of us are in touch with our emotions. But it's the evolution of Davis that is really interesting to me, and the evolution of his relationship with his sister, who is incredibly accomplished. And I quite like Olivia. I would like to hang out with Olivia more. But that sibling relationship, I'm not sure Davis knows exactly how much it formed him as well, because there's also a pretty significant age gap between the two.
There is. That was also something that I initially had no interest in writing in, and just sort of worked its way into the narrative very quickly. Davis and Olivia's relationship is one where I was really interested in showcasing some of Davis's flaws, some of his mistakes, some of the ways in which he may have sort of jumped the gun in writing someone off a little bit, someone who maybe didn't need to be written off. And he doesn't realize, towards the end, I think he starts to get there, but he doesn't realize how much she shaped who he was. I just think he doesn't get it. I've always been interested in the ways in which young people, people who are new to adulthood, are unaware of the ways in which they've been shaped and formed by the older people around them. And I don't mean to suggest that I was always aware of it, but, I grew up in a home where I'm the youngest of 4 kids. My parents had me when they were 41 and 50. My siblings are 17, 15, and 10 years older than me. And so I was always aware of my youth in this context of people who are much older than me. I was always interested in the porousness of that and what got lost in translation moving between all of us. And so this was my opportunity to really dive into that and hope that I could find a way for these two to kind of find their way back to each other as well.
Without Olivia stepping in to be mom, which I find hugely, the sibling relationship to me is, it's a fun one to read about because it is, as much as, you can have siblings in the same family who have very different memories of things. Like, wait, were we in the same? I don't understand. But it is also really hard to hide stuff from your siblings for the exact same reason, because even if you don't remember the thing, you can't fundamentally hide who you are.
Nope.
From a sibling, because they'll just sniff it out. They'll just look at you and be like,
Yeah.
So they're better than the evolution. Yeah.
Yeah. They're better than bombs sniffing dogs. They just, they always know. And they will call you out, and they'll call you out lovingly. And they'll do it quietly if it needs to be done quietly or covertly. I think this is especially true with queerness. But yeah, no, I was so interested in all of that.
We need to talk about Ohio, though, and not just Toni Morrison's Ohio. We need to talk about your Ohio. I don't know it well. I don't. But I do feel like, I'm thinking of, Hanif Abdur-Rakib and, Saeed Jones spent some time in Columbus and whatnot. I do think there is something about the place, Toni Morrison aside, that factors into books and words and culture in a way that I wouldn't have necessarily expected.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your Ohio. I want to talk about how we got to the Ohio in the book, but also your Ohio.
It's funny. Ohio and Cleveland in particular, because that's the part of Ohio where I'm from, I have realized in the last few years are deeply, deeply important to me and central to who I am. And it's shaped, there are ways in which it has absolutely shaped my worldview. And one of the things that I love about Ohio and that I'm interested in exploring in my body of work is that everything is there and everyone is there. When I was in high school and I was playing the viola very seriously, one of my conductors said that the reason why really important famous composers like Beethoven, like Brahms, they all played the viola and that was their favorite instrument to play.
I didn't know. I had no idea.
Many of them played many instruments, but many of them would talk about how the viola was their favorite instrument to play. And the reason was because it was in the center of the sound. And if you played the viola, you could hear everything that was happening in the symphony. And, and that's why it was so important. And it plays such an important role in terms of the classical music that we have. And I liken that to what it's like to be in the Midwest and to be in Ohio. You hear everything from every angle, from every point of view. You experience every kind of person loudly. You will be in pockets where you feel like you're in a suburb of Massachusetts, and you'll be in pockets where you feel like you're in the deserts of Arizona. You're never actually in a desert in Ohio, but you'll feel like you are culturally. And I think there's something beautiful about that. And there's something so great about that. The fact that this place in the middle of the country can be a meeting place for all kinds of people. It's a place where all kinds of people can live together really beautifully. And that's not to say that everything is harmonious in Ohio all the time. It's not. I am deeply ashamed of a lot of what's happening politically there, although also there's great things that are happening politically there, and there's important resistance that's happening. But I just say that to say that you get a taste of a real taste of everything, and not just a sampling, but a real taste. And that And so the Ohio that's in this book, the Cleveland that's in this book, is just one version of it that I know, but I know many of them, and I hope that over the course of my life and my career, I get to write many of them into my work.
But did you have to leave in order to write about
Yes.
Cleveland?
Yes. Absolutely. I had to, and when I first started writing, I had no real interest in writing Cleveland. I set things in the area because I knew it, but there was no intention. It was sort of a placeholder. And, most of this book takes place in New York and on the East Coast, but it still feels distinctly Ohioan to me because I've infused all of that into it. But I absolutely had to leave Ohio for many reasons. The jury's out on whether or not I'll return to Ohio and live there. But I feel completely entitled and like it's okay to write about it because I lived there from the age of 1 until the age of 18.
I do think place also gets into you whether you want it to or not. I have some leftover things from places I have not lived in a really long time. And, I think all of it sort of ends up sticking itself to our DNA in ways that we may not necessarily expect. I do think, though, I like the idea of Davis being a transplant to New York. And part of the Davis that we experience and his story, I don't think could have happened if he hadn't. It's not just that he found his way to New York, but also who he is and fundamentally how he approaches art and relationships and all of the things that make a novel a novel. I mean, that interiority. Although you really did need to write this in the third person. I don't think this would have necessarily worked. I was playing with the idea actually as I was rereading, and I was like, I think this really does have to be a close third.
Thank you. I think so. I tried first person.
Yeah.
At one point, it didn't work. It fizzled out quickly. One thing I am good at as a writer, I know pretty quickly when I try something if it's not working. It takes a couple days, a couple pages, and I'm like, oh, this isn't the right path usually. So I am able to stop those quickly, but it had to be third person.
Yeah. You've worked as an editor. You're currently the editor-in-chief of Electric Literature. And if you're listening and you don't know Electric Literature, please go check it out. You do really interesting, smart stuff with a really wide range of voices. But now you're on the other side. I mean, here's your novel and you had to hand it off to someone to edit. And it does change the process. And really, everyone needs an editor.
Oh, yes,
I write miles of copy and I still, everyone needs an editor. I can't, everyone needs an editor. But I do want to talk about the intersection of your day job and your, now launched book career, because it's a similar set of muscles, sure, but it's not the exact same.
It is not. It's not. I find that they help each other. I spent many years working in a totally different field for my day job, making my living elsewhere, and all of my writing and my editorial pursuits were done on the side. And that was fine. I survived. I did it. But when I got the Electric Lit job, it really changed my life, because what it did was the real goal. When I decided I wanted to try being a writer, which was right after I graduated college, I wrote a short story over the summer, and I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. And it was awful. The short story was awful. No one would ever see it. I immediately read it and I was like, this is terrible, but I love doing it. So I'm just going to have to figure out how to get better. And that's how I went about it. But the goal was to become full-time literary, because at that point I was like, I don't know if anyone will ever like my writing or if I'm talented enough to get published. I'm going to try to write. I'm going to get an MFA. I'm going to get the training that I need. But what I really wanted was to be able to organize my life around writing and storytelling and books and words. And that was the guiding principle. And so when I got the job at Electric Lit, by that time, I had an agent. This book was almost done. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I have a fighting chance of being an author. But I had already been editing at all these literary journals. I'd edited at The Rumpus for 4 years. I'd edited at Apogee Journal. I'd edited award-winning stories. And I knew that I wanted to edit, and being able to cut off a previous career and kind of shut off that part of my brain and fully devote myself to this work was really amazing. And, one thing about being an editor and being a writer is that they both, for me at least, create a real sense of humility in the way that I approach both, because I understand where my editors are coming from. and the realities that they have to deal with that maybe are not always attractive to a super creative artistic mind. Like I get all that stuff, right? And I also get where the writer is coming from because I experienced that, and I can have compassion for both and really kind of try and work with people by meeting them where they are because I understand where they are. And I think that makes for a person who approaches just both positions with a real sense of like, here's my part. Now let's work together to make this as great as it can be, you know?
You mentioned a couple of literary influences. I mean, you and I share a love of Elizabeth Strout.
Mm-hmm.
And Toni Morrison is, of course, Toni Morrison. Like
the queen.
Full stop. Toni Morrison, period.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to talk about other literary influences. You do have an MFA, and an MFA will expose you to writers that you may not necessarily stumble across if you're, shall we say, doing your own MFA, right?
Right.
Which is possible. Listen, MFA is one route to doing the thing, and it's not for everyone, and it does work for lots of folks when you find the right place to be. But so I remain neutral on MFA or not. If it works for you, fabulous. But I want to talk about literary influences because there is sort of not just an old-fashioned riff to the classical music and the viola, and there's some structural stuff that is sort of very classically an American novel.
Yes.
So influences. Influences. Let's talk about how Den became Den the novelist.
I mean, there are so many. And there are influences that I think you see in this book, and there are influences that you wouldn't see. But in terms of thinking about the MFA, you know, my MFA is actually the first place where I read fiction by James Baldwin. Yeah, I had never read his fiction before. I had read his nonfiction, and I'd read some of his essays in some of my coursework in college, in religion classes and English classes, but I had not read his fiction, shown to me by a really wonderful professor at Sarah Lawrence named Mary Morris. And she had a huge impact on my career. And she was like, you've got to be reading James Baldwin. And so I read Sonny's Blues, which of course completely stole my heart. I read that story every year. I reread that entire book every year. Going to Meet the Man, that final story in the collection, the title story, Going to Meet the Man, like that. Talk about one, writing across difference, and talk about two, just like high drama. That was the first time I took a book and threw it across the room. And I was like, this is wild. So it was also the first place where I was exposed to James Salter and the novel Light Years, which was a huge influence specifically on this book and my approach to marriage, intimacy, domesticity, sex writing. He was really influential for me in that way. And then after that, you know, in those early years of being in New York, I was just like, you know, diving into reading books. I was working, I was reading, I was writing a little bit, but that first year after my MFA, I didn't get a lot of writing done. There's a novel that came out in 2013 that I read in 2014 called Ghana Must Go by the writer Taiye Selasi.
Oh, I know that book. It was a Discover pick back in the day. I love that book. And I love Taiye. Waiting for her to, I think she's doing so much other stuff that we might not get another novel, but I'm just like, hi.
Hi. Me too. I'm hoping that book, it was like my life stopped when I picked up that book. And I furiously read it for 3 days, and then I got towards the end and had to stop because I wasn't ready for it to end. But as I read it, two things happened. I was like, well, you know what this reminds me of? The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. And I went and found an interview she gave where she talked about how she only read a few books while she was writing Ghana Must Go, and one of them was The God of Small Things. And I was like, I knew it. So that was like, okay, my readerly instincts are good. And I need to know that as a writer. But it just made me realize that I needed to stop everything with my own novel, which I wasn't that far into. I was maybe 50 pages into it. And I needed to completely rewrite it because I had forgotten about the fun that I could have with sentences and with voices. I was writing totally utilitarian sentences that were boring me, and I was becoming bored. And if there's one thing about When the Harvest Comes, I do not think it's boring. I do not think it's boring to read. It wasn't boring to write. But I had to completely start rewriting everything from scratch so that I could write the kinds of sentences that would drive me through the process of a novel. And I did. And I completely just restarted it in 2014.
I love the idea that it's because Ghana Must Go is part of your literary education. That book delights me to no end. It's been a really long time since I've read it, but there are times, especially when you're a bookseller, where you get to pick something up and you're like, oh, hi, where have you been all of my life?
Yeah.
And, I'm so delighted hearing you say that you were reading Baldwin's fiction. I mean, Baldwin's fiction for me actually was the first introduction, but I was an adolescent reading it. And this is, back around the time that light bulbs were invented. And Another Country, man, like, that's still kind of, knocks that opening where Rufus is, in Times Square and Giovanni's room and Go Tell It on the Mountain. And it's really, I'm always delighted when I hear other people saying, and this happened actually at one of our stores in California. I was in Santa Monica and this customer was picking up Beale Street off the shelf. And I was like, oh, that's so good. That is so good. And he's like, yeah, I've always meant to read this guy. And I'm like, oh, you're in, because I mean, reading Baldwin for the first time and your head explodes.
Yeah.
Right. And then you can go back to it and you're just like, okay, my head just exploded again. And I've read this before. And that's the thing, especially with him, where you're like, oh, hi. Like, I can't really think of a minor Baldwin that makes me itch. I mean, maybe there's some like late movie criticism where I'm like, okay, I'm good.
Yeah.
But the bulk of the body of work, it's just like there is always a surprise, which brings me to you and the writing of When the Harvest Comes. I mean, you're saying that there was fun in the sentences and the voice and everything else, but did you also surprise yourself, or were you thinking, oh, I kind of know what's going to happen?
No, I fully surprised myself. I find that, it's funny when I write a short story, I kind of have a handle on what's going to happen when I sit down to write it. I kind of know the length. I kind of know what's going to be there. I found that at least for the process of writing this novel, I had to let go of any sense of planning and let myself just sort of feel around the house and figure out what was going to be there, what was not going to be there, whose voices I was going to include, what point of views I was going to include. And so I absolutely surprised myself. And I would also say that this novel really grew up with me, alongside me, because it took so many years, right? The arc of it, again, did not reveal itself to me until just a few years ago, in terms of where it was really going to go. And I knew that I had found it. I just sort of knew that I had found it. So there were surprises all along the way. I was surprised at some of the political stuff that's in the book. I was surprised that I was surprised at what happens with Everett's family in the books. All of that was a total surprise for me.
Davis's dad gets more nuance than a dad might get, which I appreciate. You do also put him into a literal car crash. That doesn't feel like a spoiler. We meet him when he's not in the best shape.
No.
But I think it's important, especially the way you're cutting sort of back and forth and whatnot. Dad feels like a character we think we've met before. Everett's family feels like characters that we've sort of met before, and obviously we're not going into detail. But I want to talk about blowing up expectations, because I think you do that quite nicely. Like, Olivia, we have to put Olivia off to the side. I just adore her. But, family's complicated. We get what we get, right? We get
yes, we get. Do.
And if we're lucky, it's okay. But I want to talk about blowing up expectations, because Everett's family, there are a couple of surprises. One, not so much, but, a couple of surprises, some family stuff. And the Reverend, a couple of surprises, but kind of not. Yeah. Supporting cast, family.
Yeah.
How'd you do it without making them black and white? But I'm bummed.
I always say that's why it took 14 years. It took me a long time to know them and to know what I wanted to be on the page, and also what about each character could sort of live in the white space on the page.
Yeah.
What could be implied, what a reader could infer. But that is such an important craft element as well. But it was super, super important to me to make sure that I showed these characters, especially Davis's family, Davis's Black family, as full human beings with full capacity to love, to be able to think beyond the preconceived notions that they think that they should have about Davis and about queerness, and to be able to rise above that. And that comes from, when I was in high school and I was coming out at that time as a gay boy, everyone in my life who was not in my family was like, you're so brave because your family's so religious. And, they were having some trouble accepting it at the time. And, at the time I was just like, this is just my reality and this is my family. Like, this is just how it is. And I always understood how much my parents loved me and how much my family loved me. And I always understood how that was guiding the way that they were thinking about some things. And that is how I had grace and patience. And, I feel like that story isn't told often enough. We are so often, I think as queer people, we're told that we can and should write people off. And I also think there's something deeply Black about not writing people off, about living in that porousness and trying to pull people along with you. I have had times even in my life in recent years where some friends have been like, you should cut this person off. They're doing really problematic things online. And I was like, we don't do that. Like, I don't do that. And I wanted to write a book that gave voice to that reality, even though arguably this character has done that and is having to live with the consequences.
Well, and living with the consequences, yes, but also even just being able to explore tenderness, right? Like, it's something that we seem as a culture right now to not be handling well. Empathy, tenderness, all of these things that are a little scary and a little squishy. And it's wild to say something like tenderness can be scary, but we are in a place as a society where everyone's in self-protective mode in a way that is not necessarily helping. And this is the beauty of having a book, right? Like, you can dive into whatever you want and spend time with people that you might not otherwise know or have expectations for their behavior. And then you're like, wait a minute, what? What? Excuse me?
Yep.
I mean, that's right. Like, there was that study years ago about how reading helps build your empathy muscle. I'm like, yes, this is a good thing. Let's do more of this, please. Yeah. And I know I asked you at the top of the show how it feels to have the book out in the world, but I mean, we're taping slightly in advance of publication. Do you miss these characters though? I mean, I feel like the book has a very sort of concrete vibe to it, but for you to have to put it down and say, well, now I'm going to think about the next thing, or now Electric Lit needs this.
I don't miss them yet.
Okay.
But I think because I feel like I'm still in it, even though I'm not writing it, but I am, I know that I will miss them, and I am starting to move into the next novel. So I'm really excited to go through the process again. I'm hoping that I can do it a lot faster. But it feels a little bit like I'm having an affair on these characters.
I get it. I get it. It's funny to hear you say it that way, but I get it.
Yeah. It's funny to think of it that way. And I think that eventually that will shift, but it does feel a little like I'm cheating on them.
So what did you learn writing the first novel, though, that you're going to take into the second project? I'm going to call it a project because I don't know exactly what it is, but you have now written a book-length thing with a definite beginning, middle, and end. Like, you've done the thing, right? So what do you take away from it, craft-wise?
I mean, I think I have a much better sense of how to think about structure from the beginning. I think with this book, I was just wading my way through the swamp, trying to figure it out. I feel like I can go into it with a little bit more of a plan for this one. I also think that part of what took me so long is I held this book so close to my chest for so long, I wouldn't show any pages to anyone. Like it was just like, I was like, I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. And I have a very high standard for when I'm going to show people work for feedback, but I can loosen that a little bit and I can show people pages sooner and get really useful help from them. And you would think I would know that from having an MFA, but I needed to learn it in this process. And so I think that will hopefully help me to move faster through this one.
There's the academic world and then there's the world. And, you know, I liked school. I had a really good time and then I was done. It's like, hello.
Yes.
And if anything, this show has taught me that I probably should have done more independent study. I go down these rabbit holes and I'm like, hi.
Oh, yeah.
Wild stuff sometimes. Yeah, I just, sometimes you got to lead with your chin and figure it out.
Yeah, you do. And every novel's different. So I'm prepared for the fact that I already feel again like I don't know what I'm doing. So, you know, we'll see. But it's there. It's there.
Isn't that kind of good though to not know what to have expectations where you're like, yeah, I've done it, but it doesn't mean I know all of the things. Like you don't know what you don't know.
I think it is good. It's humility again, which I think is important in creative pursuit. And it's openness and it's flexibility and it's being able to like, yes, I can go where the wind takes me. I'm not like rigidly held to a certain expectation or a certain plan. And I think that's super, super important when it comes to creative work and really seriously trying to make art.
Oh, that's such a good place to end. Let's just go make a lot of art, right? Let's just make a lot of art and write a lot of books and a lot of poems and songs and all of that good stuff. Denne Michele Norris, it is so good to see you. When the Harvest Comes is out now.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.